So, put some thought into the type of system you want, discuss the design that you're thinking of, and, take some time to actually review the floor plan with the contractor and look at your options for zoning. On larger houses, probably 4,000 square feet and above, you're probably going to start looking into a hydro air system where you have a number of systems that are going to be operating and could quite possibly give you some energy efficiency control with which ones are running at full capacity and which ones are not. So, another requirement in the scope of work would be that make and model numbers of the proposed equipment be included in the proposal. Now, this is not something, again, that I would do. I wanted to keep this a secret. I didn't want to give away my chosen equipment. But it's something that needs to be done. Your HERS rater needs this information, and it's actually good due diligence done at the beginning of the system design process, not when the truck pulls up to the job site and the guys start unloading equipment that they kind of ordered on the fly a day before. You want to make sure you know what you're getting and that that's what actually shows up on the job. There's also a lot of information in model numbers that you'll need to assess whether or not the system has been sized and matched properly in order to achieve the intended efficiency ratings. So, your outside condenser needs to be ARI rated to work with your indoor coil. Those are approved and tested and verified combinations that enable the system to work the way it's been designed to work. You know that you're going to require your sealed ducts to perform at less than 60 FMs to outside per 100 square feet. And one recommendation, you're an Energy Star builder. This means a lot to you. So require it as a performance requirement. Perhaps you might want to include it in your payment schedule. That may give the contractor more incentive to seal those ducts up properly, to make sure his crew knows how to seal the ducts up properly, and might prevent some extra time and money that you may have to spend in resealing, identifying places where you're maybe leaking and not passing your duct blower test, and then also having the rater come back and perform a second duct test. So maybe adjusting your payment terms to include that as a performance requirement might motivate the contractor to make sure they know what to do. Require proper commissioning. Another word for this, commissioning, startup, quality installation verification. This is to be done after the home is occupied and the system has been operating during cooling season. Not all installers do a proper startup, but it's definitely something that needs to be done. Condensers do not come out of the factory with a proper refrigerant charge. They're charged, but that needs to be adjusted based on how the airflow and the static pressures read throughout the duct system, as well as with the coil. So proper commissioning definitely adjusts your airflow. It tweaks out the system, and that'll change once the home is occupied and 10 people show up and they're living there, and maybe they bring a bunch of plants in the house, and the loads start to change, and that's why commissioning is a good thing to actually offer your new homeowner as an added-on service. Require product literature. This, I think, is code that you provide literature to all your homeowners on all of their appliances, but the right thing to actually do with that literature is to adhere it somehow to the heating system. This is just a really good thing to do for future service. Technicians always need to refer to certain technical data that's in that literature, so it makes it just so much easier for them to start up, commission, do preventative maintenance, to actually, maybe troubleshoot some of the equipment, not to mention just the make and model number. Sometimes that disappears over time. So maybe figure out some kind of plan to handle that. So the first thing we're going to talk about for your requirement is, why do I need a manual J and S load calculation? You know, does anybody actually use that when they're assessing a system? Has anybody seen it? Know what it looks like? Okay. Well, it could be a little daunting if you're not really familiar with how to read one and interpret it. So I'll get into that. But a manual J load calculation is basically a measurement of how much heating and cooling capacity a home will need under project design conditions. So we talked about those design conditions. That would be your outdoor temperature for that particular area and your indoor temperature. So basically, on the hottest, over time and recorded weather data, the hottest possible day that they've recorded most likely be 87 degrees. So we need to size the cooling equipment to maintain 75. Doesn't necessarily mean that if somebody punches the thermostat and wants it to be 72, that it won't operate, but it just actually is just the way the manufacturer designs the equipment and the way it stages itself to handle the loads and the changing loads within that house. A manual S provides the method to select air conditioning equipment. This is, again, part of that ambiguous section of that note, that requirement note, because you really don't need a manual S in order to size equipment properly. There are a lot of other methods that are adequate that cooling contractors will use, but you might want to query your contractor or someone who's bidding on your job about what their method is. And again, I'll get into those a little bit later. But basically, if you were using a software for Manual J, the software would just recommend certain types of equipment. You plug in the manufacturer and it would spit out the model numbers kind of based on the loads in that calculation. We talked about an Energy Star home, and typically it requires less cooling capacity because of high insulation levels. So that insulation construction type would be tight. This is something that you'll actually see on a manual J load calculation. You have tight, you have average, below average. You know, typically like a home that was built before 1930 that has no insulation would be, you know, below average or loose. Depends on the software. You're going to have sealed up ducts, so you have a very tight distribution system, which will minimize the loss of conditioned air from the ducts, and that will actually affect the loads within the house. So without a manual J load calculation, if somebody is, again, sizing a system by rule of thumb, without your plans, without your manual J, then the system will most likely be oversized. Oversizing is a comfort level that has been going on for many, many years. It's more often that systems are oversized than undersized. However, the complaints that you could get from an oversized system are often what people or contractors perceive as undersized systems. So it's kind of interesting how that happens.